Welcome to another edition of Calgary in Depth. Today we have a very special guest. Her name is Eunice Abiona. I know she's going to have a very interesting perspective on the city, and she's generously offered to share some of her time with us today. Thank you, Eunice, for joining me.
I'm excited to be here, Dan. Thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. If we could start with just tell me how long you've been in Calgary and where you came from.
So my family and I arrived Calgary, let's see, February 2022. So we've this is literally our third year here in Calgary. And we arrived Calgary from Lagos, Nigeria, which is where we've lived for all of our lives. Yeah, my husband used to live in the UK, but then he's been in Nigeria largely most of his working life. So yeah, directly from Lagos, Nigeria, straight to Calgary, Alberta, in the middle of winter.
In the middle of winter. Now, did you have much of an expectation of what to expect when you arrived? Had you heard anything about Calgary before you came?
We had some family here, right?
Hmm.
So getting here, we felt pretty confident about settling in fairly quickly. We had close family ties here, but nothing prepared us for the cold, of course. We knew it was going to be cold, but we just didn't know the extent to which it was going to be cold. So that for sure was a little bit of a shock for us. And growing up as well, we've had a long history with Canada in my family. So it wasn't so much of a surprise or a shock when we landed in Calgary.
Was there snow everywhere on the ground when you arrived?
There was a whole lot of snow on the ground. There were several inches or centimeters, and we landed. So this was 2022, and we were just coming out of COVID, right? So
Hmm.
all of the things that had to happen at the airport, and we got picked up from the airport to the Airbnb because we had to quarantine for about 2 weeks. So
Hmm.
we were like literally on lockdown for 2 weeks, all of the masks and so on in place. And we had to do testing and so on while in the Airbnb. But we tried to sneak in a little bit of fun by stepping outside to see the snow. And boy, was there a whole lot of snow. I'd never seen that much snow in my life before.
Right. And can you paint a picture a bit of like how different is the climate here from Nigeria? Like, are there parts of Nigeria that are a little bit mountainous and maybe get some snows at higher elevations, or is it
Mm.
never seen there?
Nigeria is typically very hot,
Hmm.
humid. However, there's an area in Nigeria called Jos, and most of the topography is on a plateau, sort of. So the settlement is on a highland,
Hmm.
and that area tends to get cool, but not cold enough to snow. So I hear that there have been temperatures as low as, let's say, 5 to 7 degrees, but snow. There are some myths, though, that many years ago it snowed, but I don't think it's true. So typically it doesn't snow. And then the other parts of Nigeria towards the southwest, which is where we lived, Lagos, Nigeria, is a state that borders the Atlantic Ocean. That gets really hot and humid, lots of rain. And then the northern tip of the country is bordering the Sahara Desert. So that's like desert, arid climate there. So you just have a little bit of everything in Nigeria, but overall it's pretty hot. It gets super hot.
And when you were, like a kid, did you have any concept of Canada? Like, if someone's in Nigeria and they don't have relatives over here, what do you think they might think of when they hear Canada? And do they lump us in with the US?
It is possible. So, growing up from when I was a toddler, like my family had this aunt who lived and still lives in Stratford, Ontario.
Hmm.
Now, just getting me started on this story, I'm so excited just talking about it because today she's 91 years old. I spoke with her yesterday, still in high spirits,
Wow.
super bubbly, yeah, super energetic. And she's not related directly to my family, actually, but somehow just connections happened and she got to meet my dad many years ago.
Hmm.
And on account of that relationship, my parents visited Canada several times in the 80s. And that's how we got this picture about Canada. So
Hmm.
my growing up years, There were Canadian flags in our house in
Oh, wow.
Nigeria. Yes, there were Canadian flags, lots of Canadian books, coloring books, and magazines, wildlife magazines, that kind of thing. So I had the privilege of really growing up with Canadian culture as well as the Nigerian culture and
Mm,
merged together, sort of fused together. So I would think, largely going back to your question, for someone who hasn't visited Canada before, yes, there's that likelihood that they would relate Canada with the US, especially because of the proximity. But yeah, I had a pretty different experience growing up.
is there a bit of a stereotype that somebody is living in Canada or the US for that matter, that they must be very well off? And the reason I ask is I visited Slovakia, which was then Czechoslovakia as a child because my father was from there. And then my
Mhm.
wife I met 15 years ago in Slovakia. And she found that when her friends learned or family members learned that she was going to go to Canada to be with me, it was like they thought, oh, if you arrive in Canada, you're given $1 million and a big house to live
Mhm.
in and a nice
Mhm.
job. And they don't realize necessarily that if you're new to a country, you start at the bottom and it's hard work. And
Yeah.
there's a wide range of we have poor people, we have homeless people, we
Yes.
have wealthy people, a wide range. So is there maybe a bit of a stereotype that if somebody is in Canada or the US, they must be practically a millionaire?
hmm More so now, more than ever, because
Mm,
there's so many things changing right now in the economies. Like it's not a Nigerian thing alone. All of the nations of the world are literally undergoing one change or one type of change or the other.
mm,
But there is that impression that if you've made it out, you must be living the life.
mm,
And yeah, it does take some explaining for everyone to really, or for those who are in Nigeria to understand that it's hard work and you're starting from ground zero. But I would say also that there are people who are well traveled now. It's not like it was many years ago where
mm,
we were all kind of secluded in Nigeria. Now, so many people have that exposure of going on holidays and traveling, and they've been able to see how things work in different parts of the world. And
mhm,
so some are pretty comfortable where they are and they're not ready to start from scratch. And they're okay, like continuing in Nigeria or whatever other part of the world where they are. So there are those different opinions, really just based on what you're ready to do and what phase of life you're in.
mhm. And based on what you said earlier, it sounded like so your husband was well established in his career, and were you also transitioning quickly into a job here, or was that something that took some time?
Our story took a little bit of time.
Mm,
If I take us back a little bit to the time prior to when we got to Canada, it took time for us to process the entire Canadian immigration side of things. And
mm,
that had a lot to do with COVID because we got into the whole process just 2019 or so, and then COVID hit. So
mm,
it took quite a bit of time for things to be processed. But during that time, we were both working. My husband was working. I had started a business and I was focusing on the business at that point.
mhm,
But I think it has quite a bit to do with the season of life you're in. In my case, I just knew that at some point I would either visit Canada with my family or we would move to Canada. Like the ties we've had growing up were just too much to just be happenstance. So I knew that at some point or the other, we would end up in Canada. And
mhm,
we tried several years ago, really, to move to Canada, but somehow things just didn't work out. The
mm.
timing was just wrong.
I see. I'm not sure if you alluded to this, but is your husband's heritage then, is he from the UK or was he originally from Nigeria as well, or?
He is Nigerian as well, but his mom worked for many years in the UK. So
Mm,
he did a bit of schooling in the UK, spent some time with her before making the decision to come back to Nigeria and work and settle
mm,
and get
mm.
married in Nigeria.
And other than the snow and the cold when you first arrived, what were some other first impressions you had of the city and of the province?
First impressions. So we came again, like I mentioned, we came in the winter
Hmm.
and I was a little bit. surprised when we got out of the airport and got in the car because I had these expectations of it'll be so beautiful, right?
Mm.
But I was a little bit disappointed because I didn't realize that, oh, because it's winter, there's not going to be that greenery that you would see in the spring or in the summer.
Hmm.
So that took me aback because oftentimes when we would go on holidays to the UK, my favorite part of arriving in the UK was usually the aerial view from the airplane. And you can see the green, the greenery, you can see meadows and those kinds of things. And I loved that. And so I expected that, but I was a little bit surprised, but I figured it out eventually.
Mm.
Other than that, we went straight to the Airbnb, so not much contact until after we got out. But the people are so friendly. Like there's someone who's smiling at you at every turn, at every corner. And so that gave us that welcoming, that sense of, hey, you're welcome here. And even
Mm.
hearing that welcome to Canada at the airport was such a big deal. Like it seemed so authentic. Like they really want us to be here and they're happy to have
Mm.
us here. And that made such a great impression on us.
Hmm. And as you say, you had been out of Nigeria before. You'd been to the UK, and I assume to other places as well. So you knew what it'd be like to be in a place like Calgary. And there isn't a huge African community here. There is a significant one, and there are festivals, and there's a strong community, but not a huge African community. Did it take a little while to not feel a little bit like an outsider for that reason?
No, we
Oh, good,
didn't feel that way at all.
good.
We had friends who were already established here,
Hmm.
who were so vested in making sure that our settlement was so smooth.
Mm.
And we spent some time with them after we got out of quarantine and all that. And we were just surrounded by a community of people who just wanted us to succeed. And to me, I felt like we had such a huge African community here as far as I was concerned. Maybe it
Hmm.
wasn't so huge, but because of the impact that they had during that time when we needed them the most, it made such a world of difference in how we settled in and how we integrated with the community. Like they would come after work and drive us around to see apartments because we needed to get our own place. There was so much sacrifice, right? Yeah, and so having that kind of support was really integral to how well and how quickly we settled in. And I don't think it's necessarily tied to having other Nigerians around because
Mm.
my family and I have been very, very fortunate to have met other Canadians who are not originally Nigerians, and they have played such an important role in how we settled in here. So I think Calgary is such an amazing place with such blessed people and authentic people and people who are genuinely interested in seeing other people and immigrants succeed.
That's wonderful that you had that feeling of support from others and that welcoming spirit. That's wonderful.
Mhm.
That's what I hope every newcomer feels when they come to Calgary. I'm sure there'll be people I talk to in the future who maybe had a negative experience for some reason.
Mhm.
Did you have any, like, whenever you move to a new country, there are fears and concerns. Do you remember before you came what concerns you might have had?
Oh, yeah. The number one concern was getting a job.
Mm.
Getting a job was the one big priority, but it had quite a bit to do with preparation as well.
Hmm.
So, what we did before we left Nigeria, and sometimes delays seem like a bad thing, but if we are able to extract some value from that delay, it actually prepares us for what it is that we're working towards.
Mm.
So, during the period when we were waiting to hear back from IRCC on our application and so on, and it was very, very frustrating. But what my husband and I did at that point was try to connect with immigrant groups working or newcomer groups working already here in Canada to find out about programs that we could potentially be a part of, even though we hadn't landed yet.
Mm.
And there were those options. One of them was CRIAT, for example. I think that's Calgary Region Immigrant Employment Council. I can't remember the name in full. So I got on that program. I applied to that program
While you were still in Nigeria, like before you
while I
came.
was still in Nigeria.
Yeah.
Yes,
Mm.
yes. And there was another one as well. It's called SOPA. I can't remember what SOPA means in full, but there was SOPA as well. And what those programs did was that they walked us through some of the things that we would need to deal with before we got to Canada. So things like the culture, things like how to tailor your resume, things like how to communicate better and the expectations in the workplace, those kinds of things that prepared us for looking for work here because we knew that we wanted to get jobs as quickly as possible. They were valuable tools that we took advantage of even before we got to Canada. And it was such a blessing that we had the opportunity to take advantage of them.
And how long did it take for you both to find work?
My husband started working about 3 months after we landed.
Hmm.
And it wasn't the kind of job that he wanted, but it was work. And with that work, like he was earning Canadian currency because it's not funny. If you're converting Nigerian naira to Canadian dollars, like it's ridiculous. It's a whole
Mm.
ton of money, right? So we wanted to be earning Canadian currency, Canadian dollars, as quickly as we possibly could. So he got a job about 3 months after we landed. And I kept searching and I kept sending out resumes. And with the knowledge that I'd gained from those programs, those newcomers settlement programs, tried to tailor my resume to the best of my ability and hope for the best. And so, about 6 months after we arrived, or not quite 6 months, sometime in July, we arrived in February. And sometime in July, I resumed work. It's been amazing since then.
How did that feel when you were both now working?
Oh my goodness. It was super exciting because we had heard stories about people who took many months before they could find work, and even the work wasn't the kind of work that they wanted, and that kind of thing. So we approached it as best we could. Yes, there was some level of trepidation because there were some things that we didn't want to do. For example, I was transitioning from my work in insurance in Nigeria, and I was transitioning back to IT because I have an IT degree,
Hmm.
and then I wanted to go back into IT here in Canada. So
Mm.
it was a big deal because I don't have IT experience specifically, but I was just looking for someone who would take a chance on me. I have project management experience, I have insurance experience, I have some business development experience. Like, who would take a chance on this newcomer and offer her a job in IT? But then it happened. Somebody actually did. And I'm still blown away at how that came together. And that's where I currently work to date.
Wonderful. Tell me, please, a little bit about some of the experiences you've had over the last 3 years. Do you guys like to get out of the city? Have you seen a lot of southern Alberta? And what are some of your favorite things to do and to go to?
We are still exploring the city. To us, we're still settling. Like, we're only
Mm.
3 years here. We're still in settlement mode. We've had the opportunity to see some amazing places. And one of my goodness, the Northern Lights, Dan, the Northern
Mm.
Lights. So this is something that I've always wanted to see forever. And so I got this app on my phone, and it would tell me what the likelihood of seeing the aurora is. And there
Mm.
was this day that I got a notification that, hey, the aurora's there. And we stepped outside. And at that point, we were living around Shaughnessy, but it was so well lit. Like, the street lights were everywhere. We couldn't see a thing. And we drove all the way to Glenmore area. We still couldn't see the aurora until sometime in 2023. I just stepped out of the house, looked up, and behold, the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in the sky right in front of me, right? I didn't have to drive anywhere. It was so beautiful. And that memory has stuck with me for many years. I mean, for such a long time. But apart from that, we've been to Waterton. We went to Waterton last August,
Hmm.
and it was beautiful. I love Waterton. We've had the opportunity to see Banff and the mountains and Lake Louise. And I know there's still so much yet for us to see. We're planning all kinds of things.
And for those who are new to the city or aren't in Calgary yet, Waterton is a national park about 2.5 hours south of the city. So it's in the mountains, and there's a beautiful lake and a hotel and amazing hiking. So easy day drive, 2.5 hours or
Yes,
so away.
absolutely. And we went in the summer and had the opportunity to take the boat cruise,
Mm.
Waterton to the border with the US.
Hmm.
Yeah, and the vegetation really reminded me of a Nigerian forest because it was so dense and
Mm.
thick. We didn't have the opportunity, we didn't get to see any animals, though. We were hoping we would see a bear or something.
Well, if you want to see bears, I've had the best luck driving to Jasper from Calgary to see bears. We did one road trip to Jasper, which is, I guess it's between 3 and 4 hours from Calgary. And we saw two separate sets of bears on the one
Mhm.
road trip. It was amazing, just on the side of
Oh,
the highway.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and last August, our plan was actually to go to Jasper, but then the fire
Yes.
happened, and yeah, Jasper has been on our bucket list for many years. We just hope things get back to where they were, or at least some semblance of where they were.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, last July were some very bad wildfires that destroyed, I believe, some 30 to 40% of the town. But they're going to bounce back, and they're already doing well, but they're not 100%, of course. Say a friend or relative were visiting from Nigeria. What do you think would be on the list other than what you've already mentioned? What would you do with them? How would you show off our city in southern Alberta?
Hmm, good question. It depends on when they visit, right?
Mm.
So if they visit in the summer, we could try out Dromella, see what's going on there to get all their dinosaur history back in position so they learn one or two things. I think one of the things I love a lot about Calgary is that there's so much sunlight. So it gets almost as warm as it is in Nigeria. So in the
Mm.
summer is the best time for someone who's lived in a tropical region to visit because it's very warm in the summer. So Bromella would be one place to visit. The zoo, I love Calgary Zoo. I
Mm.
absolutely love the Calgary Zoo. We spent hours and hours there when we visited first. So I would definitely take family or friends to the zoo. And then for maybe for a short out of the city kind of drive to Canmore, the Three Sisters Mountains. It's such a beautiful view. So we would probably take them around there as well. And for hikes, we could probably do maybe Kananaskis. That was where we had our first Calgary or Canadian hike ever. And
Mm.
it was breathtaking. Like, I'm not good with heights, but I was ready to brave the little elevation on
Mhm.
this hike, and it was really nice. So yeah, just a few places, and like I said, we're still discovering Calgary and Alberta as a whole. So we will definitely have some more places to show them.
Wonderful. And as I mentioned, my wife came here from Slovakia about 15 years ago, and it took her about 5 years to get citizenship. So I'm guessing you have not gotten yours yet, right?
Not yet.
Can you imagine what it'll feel like when that happens?
Well, it's actually going to happen this year. After 3 years, we can apply for our
Okay.
citizenship and take the tests, and we are looking forward to that. I mean, time has flown so quickly, and we're still awestruck that it's already time, and we get that opportunity to apply for citizenship already. So maybe things are a little bit different now than they were when your wife arrived, but yeah, we're ready to apply any moment now.
I assume that Nigeria allows dual citizenship, correct? So you'll be able to have both?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we can have that.
Well, anything else you'd say to someone who maybe is new to the city or is thinking of making Calgary their home? Anything else you'd offer to them before we wrap up here?
I would say just do your best in preparing because if you're coming to settle here, it's going to be home. So if there's anything that you can do ahead of time before you get here, by all means, do it. One thing that served me quite a bit is I used LinkedIn quite a bit to connect with people who were already here in Calgary. And
Mhm.
you'll be amazed at complete strangers who are ready to speak with you, get on a Zoom call, and give you some tips and share some experiences with you about what needs to happen or what you need to do after you land and how you can better prepare for your settlement or your arrival in Calgary. So preparation for sure is one thing. And just be focused on your goals. Like everybody has their own timelines. Things don't happen for everyone at the same time, but you've got to go at your own pace and stay focused, and eventually things will come together for you. So those are two things that I would say have helped us, and I believe will help someone else who is working or planning to make Calgary home.
Thank you, Eunice. That's wonderful advice. I really find that very encouraging. If I wasn't already living in Calgary, what you just said would make me want to move here.
Oh,
Because
wow. That's good to know.
no, we are very fortunate, aren't we? There are so many opportunities, and like you say, you have to take some initiative, right? Especially if you don't have connections here already, you have to take
Mhm.
some initiative and do your homework. But if you do, opportunities are limitless, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me, Eunice.
What you're doing is going to be of great value to people who would listen to it and will help them a great deal with their settlement in Calgary.